Hello and welcome to another episode of BioTalk. I'm Chelsea Zimmerman, and with me again is Rebecca Taylor. And today we're going to be talking about Down syndrome. As many of you probably don't know, October is Down Syndrome Awareness Month. So we're going to kind of raise awareness, I suppose, about Down syndrome. I feel like there's a lot of misinformation, misunderstanding about the disorder, because obviously, we know that parents who get a positive diagnosis for Down syndrome in the womb are often encouraged to have an abortion because, they're told these horror stories about what Down syndrome is like, what their child will be like with Down syndrome. So we're going to talk about what Down syndrome is and some of the positive things about children with Down syndrome and some of the positive things that are happening to treat Down syndrome in the future, possibly. So let's just get started with that, some background on what is Down syndrome. What are we talking about? What do we mean when we're talking about Down syndrome and what that disorder involves?
Well, Down syndrome, a lot of people know, is a condition that's actually trisomy 21, which means that every cell in a person with Downs has an extra 21st chromosome. It's this tiny little chromosome, and that causes some medical issues. We know the typical developmental delay. Some cognitive disabilities. Some of them are severe and some of them aren't. There's also, from my understanding, a higher risk of leukemias, blood cancers, things like that. Heart issues. I think the heart sometimes doesn't develop exactly the way it's supposed to. Some thyroid problems. I know that there's early onset dementia, a risk of that. This was a disorder that actually the genetic cause was discovered by Jerome Lejeune, who was a wonderful Catholic geneticist, very pro-life, very much a man of science and faith, which is really great. Mm-hmm. And he was a real champion for the Down syndrome.
So there are a lot of negative aspects of Down syndrome, obviously. With the it is a genetic disorder. It does cause some complications for the individual with Down syndrome. But what most people don't understand is that it's not a death sentence necessarily.
No, not even close. Yeah, right. No.
And so you get these parents especially women, especially older women who get pregnant, are encouraged to be tested for have their unborn child tested for Down syndrome, and because they have a higher risk of having a child with that disorder. So they get these tests, and the medical community, by and large, gives them horror stories. They're
bullied.
Right.
Yeah, it's a bullying, mm-hmm. Definitely a bullying situation.
And they focus so much on all of these negative things that go along with Down syndrome. But if you've ever met somebody with Down syndrome,
right.
You're not seeing. Obviously, you see the physical aspects. Their face looks different or whatever, but their personality
is fantastic. Yeah.
It is, and you're not seeing this sick child that has no quality of life.
Yeah, in fact, that's what's so interesting about Down syndrome is that 99% of Down syndrome adults that were surveyed in a recent study said they were happy. Mm-hmm. Now, I challenge you to find that in the quote normal population. You will not find a survey of 99% of adults that will say that they're happy. Okay, that doesn't exist anywhere else. So what is going on is that medical community, for whatever reason, has decided that living with Down syndrome is a horrible thing. They obviously don't know people with Down syndrome. They have no experience with it. And they're telling parents that the compassionate thing to do is to abort those children, which is ridiculous because the actual, you know, the actual people with Down syndrome are very happy. They're very happy with their lives. They're wonderful people. In fact, they bring much joy to everyone around them. It's not just them, and they're actually kind of a treasure. I mean, really, if you want to be honest, the world needs more people with Down syndrome, probably not less. And I think the sad part about abortion is that it really kind of using abortion to quote treat genetic disease, which is really the way that we're dealing with Down syndrome right now, is to just abort babies with Down syndrome. We'll just make sure they're never born. The problem with that is that it just magnifies any kind of prejudice that's already exists, right? So when you have a situation, when you have a situation where 90% of Down syndrome kids are aborted, the likelihood of you ever encountering someone with Down syndrome and seeing how happy they are and how wonderful they are and how much they love their life, that is less likely to happen. And so this perpetuation of this misguided view that people with Down syndrome are better off not being born is an easier fallacy or misrepresentation. It's easier for that to persist. I mean, Lori B. Andrews is a reproductive rights lawyer. She's written a lot of books, and she said one of her friends, her doctor, told her, basically bullied her, told her she must abort her child with Down syndrome, that this wasn't an option, she had to do it, and because her baby would be no better, no smarter than a baboon. I mean, this is the inhumanity of what goes on, I think, in doctors' offices behind closed doors. Right. I think it's pretty awful. And the more that happens, the less likely anyone is going to be able to say, oh, I know someone with Down syndrome and they're really an awesome person. Right. So, that's really the tragedy of all of that. It is a tragedy because we are all being denied the ability to know someone with Down syndrome and their positive effects on people around them.
Right. And that last part that you just said is also key. The positive effect they have on people around them. I think the other on the flip side, while it's abortion is portrayed as the compassionate thing to do for the individual with Down syndrome. Right. It's also portrayed as the best thing to do for that parent or this child is not. You're gonna be, it's gonna be hospital bills, it's going to be, you're just going to see your sick child, it's going to be a drain on you to have this child with Down syndrome. And not only are the children and the individuals with Down syndrome happy, but the parents who have these children find out how much these children enrich their own lives. That they couldn't have even imagined beforehand. And you find that a lot, even with the most, unsuspecting people. And then you've got the siblings, and you've got the, just all the people around them whose, lives they enrich. But that, too, is another kind of lie that is given to these parents, that it's going to be a drain on them, and that child's going to hold them back. You can't do what you want to do. It's not a normal child. You're not going to be able to do the same things with them. It's going to be extra care, extra work for you, extra money, and all that. So a lot of times it's been said, that Down syndrome, they're just happy people, and they're all and they bring positivity everywhere, but they function in society. I mean, they're not just these, dependent, happy people that, just go through life. They actually, they get educated, they get jobs, several of them, even acting, they're famous, some actors in movies and television.
In my community, one of our high schools in my area just elected a girl with Down syndrome as their homecoming queen. I mean, they're obviously
popular,
super loved. Everyone thinks they're great, and it was such a great little news story about this girl, and she was so happy, and everyone was so happy for her, and the whole high school was just really excited. And so I mean, it is a lie, and they're varying degrees. Okay, so we can sit, we can sit and paint Down syndrome as totally rosy, but we really wouldn't be doing a service to the truth. I mean, there are some kids with Down syndrome who are very disabled and do have a hard time. And one of the pro-life bloggers out there, Leticia Velasquez, she writes about her daughter, and she's regressing and has lost the ability to speak, and so that's been really difficult. That's not an easy thing to deal with. She's also been diagnosed with autism on top of the Down syndrome. So but there is a spectrum of highly functioning Down syndrome, and then there is not so functioning. But the reality is, we obviously won't know until the child is born. And early intervention may really improve that.
Well, and that kind of brings us to sort of the other positive aspects. They got on the one hand, there are high functioning people with Down syndrome who can get educated. I know I'm reading a story about a man who started a sandwich shop. I mean, he owns his own business essentially. And they get educated, they can get married. I remember writing a story about actually two individuals with Down syndrome marrying each other. But then for those who, for the not so high functioning, on the lower end of the spectrum of Down syndrome, there is still some positive information for them. Scientists say they have found a way to sort of silence the extra chromosome. So
it's actually really quite ingenious.
You can give us some information on that.
So we have anybody who has an X chromosome, which is basically everyone, has a gene on their X chromosome that is built to shut down that X chromosome, and this plays in women. Okay, because every single one of our cells has two X chromosomes, and we only need one to be functioning. The other one needs to shut down. Otherwise, we have a dosage problem. We don't need, two copies of every gene on the X chromosome working, which is obviously, men don't have two X chromosomes. They only have the one. So we have to shut ours down. And so there's a gene on the X chromosome that does that in every cell. It just most of the time, randomly chooses an X, depending on, one from mom, one from dad, it doesn't matter, and shuts that extra X chromosome down by covering it in RNA. Which is a product. And it basically just stops the expression of that extra X chromosome. Well, researchers were able to take cells from a person with Down syndrome, and they were able to insert that gene into the extra chromosome 21, and it did exactly what it's meant to do, which is shut down the chromosome that it's, the quote extra. And this is absolutely an amazing breakthrough, because this isn't just about Down syndrome. Obviously, this is about any kind of trisomy or any other genetic disorder like Edwards, or there are lots of different trisomies out there, and so this isn't just about Down
Many
syndrome,
of them very severe and almost are death sentences.
But some of the trisomies that are quote incompatible with life, right, that are way more severe because the chromosomes are bigger and have more genes on them. The chromosome 21 is a really small one, and it doesn't have nearly as many genes on it. So, anyway, they were able to shut this down, and this is a novel approach to treating Down syndrome, because so far there have been trials of drugs for the cognitive disabilities, working on that, which is obviously a good approach as well. But this is a gene therapy that might be able to be targeted to tissues of interest, bone marrow for the problems with leukemia, blood cells, heart or thyroid, any of the other problems, they may be able to target this to cells of interest, which would really help, especially early on, possibly with the physical and maybe even cognitive symptoms. It's definitely promising, although, gene therapy in and of itself is dangerous. We like to think we can just throw genes in wherever willy-nilly and everything's going to be fine, but that really hasn't played out that way. Gene therapy can be very dangerous. I mean, there have been, cases of cancer and deaths even by, when we insert genes into the genome. So, this is tentatively good news. Obviously, they have to make sure that safety is a priority here, because, the reality is people with Down syndrome are functioning and live, pretty healthy lives. Some of them, not as long, their lifespan isn't as long as someone without Down syndrome, but they can live a nice, long, productive life, and so we don't want to be messing with their genetics unless it's proven to be safe, and there's a justification for it. There's a serious problem that you would make an intervention on the genome. I mean, it has to be the risk has the reward has to outweigh the risk. With any gene therapy, it's the same. You need to make sure that there's safety first. So, but it's still really exciting. The idea that in 10 years we might have a gene therapy that
if not this, then something else. I mean, something else. There are. I mean, that's what is that what the you mentioned Jerome Lejeune. There's a whole foundation. Is that what they're kind of doing for treatments of Down syndrome? And
they're looking for treatments. They're funding research and things like that, because that was Jerome Lejeune's. Well, he was a real medicine. He was into real medicine, which is don't get rid of the person with the disease. Let's try to treat the disorder or the disease. Let's fix the problem instead of just ignoring it by tossing the baby out with the bathwater. I mean, that's exactly what that is. So there are a lot of initiatives, but the sad part is the less people there are with Down syndrome, the less money there is, the less push there is. Like I said, the less everyday people encounter those with Down syndrome, the less likely they're going to understand the disorder, what it means, and that these are people first, wonderful people, fantastic people to know and love, and they're so great, and that's the sad part. So I think the more there are options, the more the doctors can point to prospective parents and say, look, we think your child has Down syndrome, but these are the treatment options we have available today. Prospective parents could say, well, some of the cognitive disabilities could be treated if they're severe, or some of the other things could be, successfully treated over a long term. Obviously we would get, I think there would be less abortions for sure. I think those people with Down syndrome in their lives would be in a much less precarious position.
That's another one of the positive aspects of continuing this research, finding if not a cure, a treatment, this way of silencing, the chromosome. And that's why it's kind of hard to hear then from people in the Down syndrome community, or people, parents of people with Down syndrome who are critical of this research, who say, we need to, as one columnist put it one time, we need to cure the culture of death, not Down syndrome. Well, we need to cure the culture of death, that's for sure.
Well, obviously. It's not an either-or situation. I mean, we can have it both ways. And I completely understand this reaction of some of those with children with special needs. Absolutely. We are in protective mode at this point, because we have to be. We have to sit there and say, we have to sing the praises of people with Down syndrome, because they deserve it, because they're people first, but also because of the crazy amount of the seek and destroy mission that's going on in the womb. And we have to be very paternalistic in that sense and say, look, we have to be very protective There's nothing wrong with someone with Down syndrome. As a person, they're perfect. God made them perfect. They're wonderful people. But at the same time, we can say that and still say they have a genetic disorder that has some
Serious
issues that need to
issues,
be
yeah.
dealt with. Absolutely. We don't have to have it all or nothing. We can have it both ways. We can say people with Down syndrome are perfect. God made them perfect. Just like he made all of us perfect.
Right.
But we still have, some of us still have genetic issues. I have a genetic predisposition to high cholesterol. Okay. I can't, I'm still a perfect person, but if I could mitigate that somehow without, um, without extreme measures, that would be great. So I think we have to see Down syndrome as we do some the other genetic disorders that kids have, or people have, like cystic fibrosis, and we wouldn't hesitate to do gene therapy in someone with cystic fibrosis. In fact, there's a huge push for that. I mean, if it was safe, we would go ahead and we wouldn't even bat an eye at that. I mean,
and I actually sometimes deal with this myself, like for the past 14 years, I've kind of made it my goal to show the world, how enjoyable life with a disability can be, being in a wheelchair, having a spinal cord injury. But I mean, that doesn't mean that my situation should be thought of as ideal by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah, and I think when if we as a pro-life community kind of get scared and start to get a massive opposition to gene therapy in general for any genetic disorder, because we feel like God made people a certain way and we shouldn't mess with that. We're really kind of falling into that misrepresentation of pro-lifers as people who care only about people when they're in the womb, right? And then the minute they get out, they're kind of on their own. Obviously, we don't want that. That's not actually the way we are.
No.
And if we're publicly opposed to treatments that would help genetic disorders, I think it kind of plays into that that stereotype that isn't true. Obviously we want to help, and Leticia Velasquez, she really wrote a great article about how she feels about the possibilities of gene therapy for her daughter, and she says, I would love it if my daughter spoke again. How are people going to know how awesome she is if she never speaks again? These are real issues that parents are dealing with. Now, obviously, it's up to the parents to decide, or the Down syndrome adult, if they want to go through an invasive procedure. It obviously has to be worth it. If they're high functioning and don't have any other health problems, would you really go through with something invasive like gene therapy? Maybe not, but those that are, have major problems and are, not very functioning, or, can't speak or have other issues, obviously, they want that option to be able to possibly treat their child, or the person may, as an adult, decide that they want, to try to, push off early onset dementia. If we can get that pushed back, by a couple of decades, that would be great. God did give us the ability to know about our genetic makeup, and to He made it's a design that we can change around a little bit without too much of a hassle. And so I think we should do that in the cases where it's a therapeutic thing. Obviously, we're not going to do that in a normally healthy person. I mean, that's silly, but and dangerous. But I think we have been given tools to help people who need help, and so I think we probably, we should at least explore those options.
Anybody who gets a kind of a poor prenatal diagnosis, what do you think is the best place for them to look for advice? Obviously they're going to get the biased, sort of opinions. Hopefully they'll do more research than just listening
what the
to
doctor says. Yeah.
And
that's a big thing. I mean, you got to go outside that doctor's office, because the reality is that obstetricians don't treat children. They're not pediatricians, and they're not family doctors. So, in fact, I think there was a study done a long time ago of attitudes of different types of doctors toward, like, say, sex selection or something. And obstetricians were always like, sure, no problem, family balancing, no big deal, because they're not the ones that see, I think, the aftermath. And the family doctors and the pediatricians are always usually really against these kind of eugenic measures, because they're the ones that actually treat patients,
Right.
with autism or whatever. And so, you need to go outside that obstetrician's office and go look around. Go ask a family physician. Go and, look online. There are a lot of resources for parents.
I'm going to go ahead and plug a friend of mine. She's got the website benotafraid.net.
Benotafraid.net. Excellent. Yeah,
And,
I was going to say that too. Yeah.
It's a parent support system for all kinds of different prenatal diagnosis. They got stories there, support for parents, resources. Just ask, and they'll answer any questions that you have there.
Definitely benotafraid.net, or even just depending on the disorder, there's often like living with trisomy 13 or living with trisomy 18, or you can just do a little bit of a research, whatever the disorder is, and look for a support group, because what you're going to find is a lot of the times parents are just not given a full picture.
And that's the stories on a lot of the stories on there, especially of those who chose abortion. They'll go to those sites, and I've read stories on there of people that were just like, why did we not have this before?
Why didn't anyone tell me? Yeah.
Right. So those are some good resources, and I would say definitely keep an eye on the the Lejeune Foundation and just the good positive things that are coming out of Down syndrome research. And
Jerome Lejeune Foundation USA is a fantastic charity to give money to. You don't ever have to wonder what is going to happen with that money. And I've given them money and really felt good about it. And so definitely the Jerome Lejeune Foundation, if you want to support people with Down syndrome, that is one place to do it, where they're really looking, and you think, that Down syndrome therapies in the future are the way to go, then definitely support the Jerome Lejeune Foundation.
All right. Well, thank you for joining me once again.
Thank you.